Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for registering and joining this webinar, which is the second in a series of webinars organised by the Launch Project. My name is Matthew Halstead from TNO, the Applied Scientific Research Centre of the Netherlands. I will be moderating today's session and providing a brief overview of the testing and piloting activities we are undertaking in Launch. As many of you already know, Launch is a project funded by the European Commission under the Horizon 2020 programme. It has been running since May 2019 and will continue until late in 2021. The project's overarching objective is to accelerate and scale up growth in the sustainable energy market and to enable the aggregation of sustainable energy assets to create a market for tradable securities. Before we dive into the content, I'd like to run through some housekeeping with you. First, there is a box at the bottom right side panel in which you can enter any questions you might have. Please feel free to write your questions here during the presentations, and we will address as many as possible in the last 15 minutes or so of the webinar. Second, in the same panel, you will find the section called Handout. Here you can download all the presentations that will be made during this webinar. We will also be sending out a follow-up email with presentations attached and a link to the webinar recording. Third and finally, at the end of the webinar, you will see a post-webinar survey. We'd very much appreciate it if you could complete this survey, as it's very important for us to receive your input and feedback. Please be assured that all of your answers will remain confidential. So, to work towards achieving the objectives of Launch, the project team is developing various standardised products, tools and templates that can help grow the market for sustainable energy assets. Today's webinar will focus primarily upon a product that is really at the heart of the Launch project, the standardised energy performance contract, that the team has been working diligently on to complete over the last 10 months. The webinar focuses on the key role that an off-balance sheet standardised contract can play in building a strong sales message for contractors and project developers who are operating in the sustainable energy marketplace. There will be two very interesting presentations that will shed light on both the technical aspects of an off-balance sheet transaction and how such a transaction can bring about benefits to companies operating in the sustainable energy market. Our first speaker today is Jabba Chiki, founder and director of Luxembourg-based company NSAFE Capital and valued partner in the Launch project. Jabba has been leading the project's efforts to develop a standardised energy performance contract and will be talking us through some of the technical aspects of an off-balance sheet transaction. Our second speaker, John ORourke, president and CEO of New Energy Group based in Ireland, will then talk from the market perspective on why off-balance sheet transactions are so crucial to sales growth in the sustainable energy arena. So I will now hand you over to Jabba Chiki of NSAFE Capital. Over to you, Jabba.
Good morning all, and thank you, Matt, for this kind introduction. I hope you're all well, and from sunny Vienna, I must say the capital market is open for energy-saving green bonds. Some of you might have seen that Porsche has issued over the weekend 6 billion worth of green bonds to finance their battery-driven cars. Now, before I delve into my presentation, for all of you out there, this should be a message that the capital market is open. The only thing the capital market is lacking is actually products which we can sell to investors. Our firm, NSAFE Capital, is there to assist you, and as Matt correctly presented, we are working primarily on a standardized contract which can be used for securitization purposes, for finance purposes by banks, in order to enable the practitioner to grow its business. This is about making your business grow. That we are having the nice to have side effect, that we are reducing CO2 emissions with that, that's a given, but the principal thing is to grow your business. Now, when looking at the key elements to grow this market, we found, and it has been confirmed to me by other market participants, principally the head of Macquarie, who said to me that nobody in his right mind is ever going to change anything if it is not done for him. The widget manufacturer is out there and is using his budget in order to manufacture a better widget. If we want him to change his heating, cooling, or lighting, then we need to do it for him. We need to finance it for him. It basically needs to be a no-brainer. If it leaves money in his wallet to do other things, that's a very, very good side effect. And last but not least, as we are all human, if we've done something good, we like to be complimented for that. For anybody who is interested on that aspect, please, as is written, come and contact my colleague Alex or myself afterward, and we can help you in showing how people can talk about this. Now, a balance sheet, and I'm sorry for those who are clear on this fact that I'm going into basics, consists of two elements. On the one side, you've got the numbers, and on the other side, you've got notes. A lot of things are put into the notes of the balance sheet because they are not as such liabilities which need to be recognized in the numbers section. At the same time, many banks and institutions are principally looking at the numbers section. In order to get the lingo right, we will be speaking of the end client as the subscriber, and the ESCO, which probably most of you are, we will call the promoter. So what is off-balance sheet? Off-balance sheet, in essence, is a contractual language which allows for certain elements and certain contracts to be put into the notes of the accounts. This is having a big implication, as we will see further down, for many, many market participants. And as we have found at launch, a lot of the projects which are out there and need finance will only be done if we can make it off balance sheet. So you will find in the balances, in the numbers, you will find the assets, you will find all liabilities, and you will find clearly shareholders' equity. From where we are coming from is the recognition that the off-balance sheet is a key sales argument. Many institutions who have debt on their books are precluded from adding on further debt. Therefore, this contractual arrangement needs to be of such a contractual strength that it will be recognized off balance sheet. Having worked over the last months with my colleagues on this contract, there are two facts which are key. The first one is that most energy retrofits will be considered as off balance under GAAP principles. However, most international companies fall under IFRS rules, and in particular IFRS 16. IFRS 16 deals, let's call it in a broad sense, with leases, and here the latest rules which came in force at beginning of 2019 requalified most leases as on balance sheet. Now, there is nothing untoward of having something off balance sheet. This is not a naughty trick or anything. This is just the result of certain language and of certain services. And this is where the launch contract comes in. Now, the main element for a contract to be off balance sheet is that the asset doesn't become an asset of the subscriber. It always remains on the books of the promoter. There are certain rules around that. One of them is it needs to be clearly marked. And for many people, the concept that I've got a light bulb which is in a building which is 500 kilometers away from our office, but belongs to the promoter, is a strange concept. It is screwed into the wall, it is affixated to the wall, but as long as you mark it clearly that it belongs to the promoter, it is one of the elements which makes it off balance sheet. The second thing is that we are not selling an item, but we are selling the output of the item. Meaning you have got lumen per kilowatt, you've got tons of cooling per kilowatt. So this the service is sort of an all-inclusive service with maintenance, possibly, and that is for some people that might work, for others it doesn't work. It would include the supply of electricity as well. So it is a one-stop shop for the subscriber, who then pays a certain fee for having provided to him an output. The subscriber is getting the economic benefit. We are sharing with him a risk, and it's essential in the contract that the promoter shares a risk. Therefore, he will need to supply the service on a continuous basis, and there are certain penalties for not providing the service. This again is a very, very strong indication that the whole service should be treated as off balance sheet. One of the next elements which has been confirmed to us by auditors is that the ESCO or promoter has got the right, without the subscribers express consent, to change some of the items which he has earlier provided, subject to improving the quality and hence the economic output for the promoter. So let's say in 5 years' time, LED technology makes a big jump, and somebody is having a 10-year lighting contract. He got, for all intents and purposes, change the lights for that client. Client would still pay the same amount as he did earlier, and the promoter would reap the economic benefit. I don't know how many of you are at the moment looking at the contract which we have built, but you will see the various elements in the various clauses as shown on the present slide. So very, very important is that the promoter is in charge of design, of implementation, of maintenance, of warranty. It is his own equipment. So whilst the subscriber is having the economic benefit, he's having the lighting, he's having the cooling, he's having the heating, the equipment at any moment or given moment belongs to the promoter. And it's his task to look after his asset, which any normal commercial person would try to do, keep his own asset working as well as possible. The flip side of that is clearly that the client is having a very good service. He will have no reason of not to pay, but clearly the element and the ability for the client not to pay is one of the underlying legal concepts in making the whole contract off balance sheet. Why is off balance sheet of advantage to the end client? On as a service basis, and which our contract has been built like this, the consumer or the subscriber at the end of the day is having a hassle-free service. He knows perfectly well that he's having a pretty strong stick in his hand by withholding payment should the promoter not react to certain, let's call it, breakdown events or the equipment not performing as it should. This is very different to a warranty event. We've all been there. Something goes wrong, and then the producer of your machine says, yeah, see you in 3 weeks. This is a little bit different under the service concept. There are certain penalties for within prescribed time frames that the promoter needs to absolutely rectify. If not, if he fails, then the subscriber has got the right to withhold payment. Very important for many people is that the borrowing ability of a company for its core business is not impeded. Certain, let's call it, buildings or certain structures are bought with a lot of debt, which then the financing institution will take charge over everything. And in the covenants, it will say you are not allowed to take on any further debt except for such and such. If you now want to upgrade the building, that will not leave you room in the balance sheet to do so. Hence, if one can sell to a, let's call it a supermarket, new lighting, which is off balance sheet, the company will, despite having lending covenants, will be able to retrofit, will be able to implement certain energy saving measures, which for the promoter is good for his business, for the subscriber it's good for its P&L, because generally he will be making substantial savings. A lot of long-term contracts are subject to maintaining a certain credit quality of the borrower or of the contracting party. If there is added debt put onto the balance sheet, many suppliers will shy away from dealing with, let's call it a large chain of supermarkets. It will not give them so favorable trading terms. For a supermarket chain, which generally have got 30 to 60 days payment terms, if that is reduced to 15 days, that creates a serious problem. Hence, many shopping or supermarket chains can't do anything, can't retrofit, because they haven't got the cash flow to do so. Finally, the balance sheet, as it is having less debt, is a stronger one, which is important for a series of investors, and it makes a better picture for the company itself in the marketplace. Now, we have noticed that there are certain market segments where off-balance sheet is key. One, the largest owner of buildings are in every country municipalities. Unfortunately, on the Eurostat rules, any retrofit can only be made if it is being paid out of the economies. Otherwise, this is going to be consolidated into the national debt. And all of us know that there are plenty of countries already around Europe who already now are breaching the Maastricht criteria and who therefore cannot do anything if it is not made in such a way that it doesn't increase the national debt. Number two, certain organizations like charities are by their bylaws precluded from taking on debt. With the best of intent, they would love to change the heating in an old people's home, but simply they are not allowed to take debt. Therefore, we need to find structures for them so that they can make all of these. Last but not least, I've hinted at that certain private equity financed structures, such as large shopping malls, even hotel chains, which are generally owned by private equity investors, are maxed out on leverage. They simply cannot add anything to their balance sheet. If we want to help them to reduce their energy bill, the only way how we are able to do it is by proposing them a structure which is going to be off balance sheet, and this is what our launch contract provides for. So I hope that with this, we've been able to give you a little bit of a view on what to do, how to do it. We are here to help you. We are here to advise you, and I'm very, very happy to take questions. Matt, I think for now I've concluded my presentation.
Yes, thank you very much, Shaba. Really appreciate it. Thanks for that excellent overview of the technical aspects of an off-balance sheet transaction. As I mentioned earlier, I'd like to remind you all, please to enter your questions in the box at the bottom right side panel, and we'll do our best to answer all of these towards the end of the webinar. I'd now like to introduce John ORourke from New Energy Group. John is former CEO of Lime Energy in the United States and has decades of experience working in the energy efficiency arena, both in the States and now in Europe. He is also partner of the Launch project, and today will provide insights from a market perspective, by explaining how an off-balance sheet transaction can help a contractor's sales process and stimulate market growth. So, John, over to you. Sorry, John, we're struggling to hear you at the moment.
Yeah, that would be because I was on mute, Matt. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Again, thank you, Matt, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin with just a little historical context on the power of the off-balance sheet financing messaging to originating and closing deals in both the private and the public sector, EPC, and the as-a-service marketplace. In the late 90s, while working for a major US-based ESCO, we served basically three markets. One was the federal and state government. The second was the university and hospital marketplace. And thirdly, the commercial and industrial marketplace. The state and the federal government had IDIQ frameworks in place, and for those who are not familiar with IDIQ, that basically is indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. That really helped advance EPC and as a service in state and federal facilities in the US. And in other words, these IDIQ frameworks had solved for your typical government procurement and the associated bureaucracy barriers through an approved EPC framework. But not so in the institutional and commercial markets, where that approach would be virtually impossible. The commercial and industrial markets is where off-balance sheet financing was seen as very attractive for all the reasons that we will lay out here. In fact, once the accounting rules changed in the early noughties or late 90s, early noughties, and made off-balance sheet treatment ambiguous in the US according to GAAP rules, the commercial and industrial development pipeline all but disappeared. And as a result, ESCOs in the US became very focused on government and institutional customers, and by institutional, I mean schools, colleges, universities, hospitals. And thereafter, of course, there are other reasons for EPC being primarily used in the government and institutional markets, which will become apparent later in the presentation. So make no mistake that when we can nail down once and for all the off-balance sheet financing rules for EPC or as a service, is when we can meaningfully address the market entry barriers to commercial and industrial sectors. Unlike the US, the government and institutional markets don't have the benefit of EPC frameworks for the most part in Europe. Those that tried back in the 90s and noughties spent a lot of time and effort in doing so, but the ambiguity interpreting Eurostat rules and guidelines really stalled the effort. Having this solved for and recognized as a legitimate contract vehicle with clear procurement and accounting treatment rules can break open these sectors for off-balance sheet EPC activity in the future. To that end, the Horizon 2020 launch project is working from the ground up to develop a standardized contract that incorporates all the risk assessment protocols and legal and accounting treatments required for contractors to reduce deal closure cost and dramatically improve sales development efficiency for off-balance sheet EPC in the built environment. So let's discuss for a minute the sales process and design required to effectively develop and close deals. You have a standardized contract. You've established the accounting treatment rules. You've clearly articulated the risks and risk mitigation strategies and are now ready to navigate the customer playing field. So where to start? Who to speak with? In what order will be most effective? Which team members? And when should they engage? These are some of the key questions that have to be addressed in order to develop a sound sales strategy. I'm not going to go into the sales process design on this call, but as an aside, if you are interested in pursuing further, you can enroll in our June workshop, which I believe will cover this in a lot more detail. And feel free to send myself or Federica on an expression of interest after this call. So there are several key benefits to using EPC as a contract vehicle and clear advantages to having the projects be treated as off-balance sheet. Csaba has previously covered the technicalities, so I want to spend a little time on the customer messaging and outlining the softer but very real benefits of this offering. Key attributes to cover are the obvious financial and balance sheet benefits, but also the inherent infrastructure design benefits, as well as the system operating benefits. And as a quick aside, I would encourage everyone to have the financial benefits articulated by the finance professional in the ESCO to the customer financial evaluator, and the design and operational benefits communicated by the technical professionals to the customer technical evaluators. So in simple terms, the financial benefits for the customer are, and Csaba has covered this, is look, Mr. Customer, it doesn't affect your future borrowing capacity or affect present or future debt covenants. And for some customer classes, this is incredibly important. And for those same customer classes, they just don't have the ability from a cash flow standpoint inside their businesses to make a financing decision around energy efficiency that ultimately will reduce their costs. And this is just one of those frustrating things, particularly for the small to medium commercial class customers. It also moves non-core energy infrastructure asset improvements off the balance sheet and provides for performance-based system services. And above all, it provides clarity and certainty for future system service costs and annual budgeting. The design and operating benefits are a little more nuanced, but they are just as important. And when approaching customers with an off-balance sheet EPC or as a service, these are key messages that need to be communicated to those customers. Unlike your more traditional design, bid, build, infrastructure upgrade projects, where the design consultancy is designing to design tables, and in a lot of cases, oversizing equipment and ancillary equipment, in the EPC environment, the service provider is designing and sizing to comfort and performance metrics, resulting in an overall better performing infrastructure with the customer protected contractually, so that design and performance risk are always with the service provider. Another important attribute is, unlike your traditional contracting models, in the off-balance sheet EPC case, the service provider is developing, designing, building, owning, and servicing the infrastructure improvements. This means that there is no disaggregation among service professionals, or I guess pointing the finger after the fact, clearly a huge benefit and risk mitigation factor for clients. Given the infrastructure is owned by the service provider and key performance indicators are clearly memorialized in the service agreement, the service provider must maintain and preserve system performance over the life of the contract. This guarantees levels of system performance over the life of the equipment, while turning, in most cases, the client maintenance clock on the energy infrastructure back to zero. In addition, the service provider is incentivized to introduce new technology improvements throughout the life of the agreement, given they own the system and will have the benefit of any investments internally and can share those benefits with the host client as appropriate. System performance transparency is built into the service, given the contractual obligations of both the client and the service provider. So let me discuss here just some of the nuances and considerations for delivering off-balance sheet EPC to the private and public sector markets. And this is a fairly broad overview, as I could spend 2 hours talking about different components of each market and how they react and how they will participate in off-balance sheet EPC. So private sector clients are typically ROI, which is return on investment, and cash flow focused. With shorter investment time horizons, this means that the service agreement durations are going to be typically 8 to 10 years. And as such, the ESCO will need to uncover some very good energy savings opportunities to fit in that investment window. This is compounded by, in some cases, relatively unstable load profiles, and in the case of large commercial buildings, management by a third party who is not the owner, but just an agent. Past experience has demonstrated that industrials will clearly see the value in an off-balance sheet approach to EPC. Their commercial motivation will be to go after cost reduction opportunities within their facilities and are well used to these kinds of service agreements, especially in the energy intensive sectors of the market. So think of industrial gases and chemicals providers to industrials, as well as cogeneration services into that sector. From a sales perspective in this sector, expect to be dealing with savvy buyers and functional industry experts. A cross-functional sales team expertise will be required by the service provider. The operations folks will generally be delighted with the off-balance sheet solution, as they typically have many infrastructure improvement projects, that's energy infrastructure improvement projects, already teed up. But they haven't been able to get them done due to competing for capital with process or manufacturing projects, which typically improve the throughput and may have a better return on investment than an energy infrastructure project. The CFO of a smaller industrial, on the one hand, will scrutinize and request third-party verification on the financing treatment. And this is basically out of fear of overreaching on the balance sheet and maybe affecting debt covenants in the future. While on the other hand, the larger industrial CFO, especially if publicly traded, will not necessarily want footnotes for what could be construed as immaterial in the larger context of things. On the private commercial property side, standalone owner-occupied properties are typically a good potential candidate that will see value in the off-balance sheet treatment of infrastructure improvement. These are typically smaller projects with high origination costs, but they operate in a more sensitive credit environment. Standardized contracts and competitive financing with low deal transaction costs are critical to this group, and this is a priority for launch. The larger commercial space continues to be a challenge given the owners or the investors of these properties change on a fairly regular basis. And the day-to-day management of those assets is by third parties that are just really not incentivized to participate. However, off-balance sheet financing for these customers could significantly upgrade their asset base, allow them to actively market their carbon reduction activities to their investors, and not burden their tenants with additional costs as the investment is recovered through utility savings and avoided future operations and maintenance costs. The introduction of off-balance sheet financing and the as-a-service delivery model, provided it is presented and communicated successfully, can really be a game changer in this market sector. On the public sector side, there's a clear need and pent-up demand for energy infrastructure upgrades across the portfolio of buildings across Europe. And this need has accelerated over the last 10 years, really as a result of the 2008 recession, because in a lot of cases, maintenance and capital expenditure budgets were either frozen and in some cases drastically reduced. Certainty on Eurostat rules will unleash a rash of investment in energy efficiency activity in this space. Practically, this sector is still severely constrained by budget and outdated procurement rules. It is anticipated that the off-balance sheet treatment of energy investment grade projects, upgrade projects, will solve for the budget constraints. However, existing procurement process and rules have to be updated in order to facilitate the deployment of energy efficiency in that sector, as the delivery or the development and delivery model is very different than the traditional infrastructure upgrade model. Interestingly, as a market, it aligns with off-balance sheet performance contracting really perfectly. This sector is typically budget constrained, has an aging, unmaintained infrastructure due to the lack of available funds to maintain. They are mission-based, which means that they have a long-term investment horizon, and they have relatively stable profiles. Now, given the long-term focus, and in most cases, fairly good credit worthiness, they can secure 15 to 20-year agreements that can support comprehensive infrastructure renewal that is performance-based at a very competitive cost of capital. Designing a carefully thought-out sales approach, in addition to standardized contracts and off-balance sheet financing to these different sectors, is paramount to success in delivering on our carbon reduction goals in the built environment in Europe. And in closing, I'd like to add that Launch is really a serious platform that's dedicated to making the necessary tools for success available to all stakeholders in the market, so that finally scale can be achieved in delivering energy efficiency into the built environment across Europe. And with that, I will hand it back to Matt. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Thanks for sharing some of your thoughts and providing some real life context by talking about some of your practical experiences. We have quite a few questions to get through, and I think it would be good to jump into these as soon as possible. But before doing so, I'd like to provide you with a brief overview of the Launch pilot program and the steps we are taking together with the Launch community to produce market-ready materials that can drive forward the sustainable energy market. The Launch community has already grown to around 280 stakeholders from various different fields, such as project development, government, consultancy, and of course, the financial sector. It is very exciting for the Launch project to have such a broad level of engagement from the market, and there are a number of key benefits to being connected and actively involved in the Launch community. For example, you can engage with financiers, join various free launch events, such as the Contractors Workshop and Equity Raise event that we organised back in November 2019. and becoming a first mover when it comes to receiving and testing the launch materials that the project team is developing. So these materials include the standardized energy performance contract, for which we have already received some very useful and positive feedback from several stakeholders. The team is putting together a set of value propositions and sales messages to help contractors build strong project pipelines. We will run a second workshop, as John has alluded to, on this topic in June. And after this webinar, contractors in the launch network will be asked to complete a survey to benchmark their sales process maturity. A standardized risk assessment protocol has already been drafted for investors to be able to systematically assess the risk of energy service companies and their end clients. And this is currently being tested with a small group of ESCOs. The protocol will be sent out over the coming months to the wider launch network. And lastly, materials are being developed and events organized to support ESCOs in raising growth capital. So please keep an eye out in your email inbox for launch communications, and do reach out to us if you're interested in providing feedback and using the launch materials in live project settings. As mentioned, we have already started the feedback loop with regards to the standardized energy performance contract. And the team is now busy synthesizing this feedback and will be updating the contract accordingly over the coming weeks. The aim is to resend the adjusted contract out to the launch network later this month in March, so it can be tested with end clients. So thank you all for listening to the webinar presentations. We'll now try to tackle some of the questions that you've kindly posed during the webinar. We have roughly 10 to 15 minutes, so unfortunately I don't think we'll get through all of the questions. If that is indeed the case, we'll try and reach out bilaterally to as many of you as possible following the webinar. So the first question I think probably is for you, Jabba, and this is: how would companies that have to report IFRS 16 deal with the off-balance sheet recording of the contract?
Well, how would they deal with the off-balance sheet recording? Now, the recording of a contract at the end of the day is always the decision of the auditor. But we are getting strong comfort from the Big Four or Big Five that the contract as drafted presently will be viewed by auditors as off-balance sheet. Now, I'm not sure what else I can add to that, but simply the language of the contract is such that it will be recognized by A, the accountants, and then B, by the auditors as off-balance sheet. I don't know if that was satisfactory, but I'm very happy to have a bilateral discussion later on this one.
Thank you, Jabba. I think the following question is probably also addressed to you, and that is: does launch also look at moving the assets from the promoter's balance sheet to the balance sheet of a third-party financing provider, for example, through assignment of rights?
Well, the whole idea of launch is to create standardized financial products, and clearly for any promoter to be able to move his receivables or his contracts, and this is now only the financial side of it, but not the technical aspect of needing to maintain the equipment, which clearly always stays with the promoter. But yes, I mean, this is one of the big things, and you can come and talk to us at NSAFE Capital. This is what we do. We take your receivables, technically speaking, we put a piece of string around it, tie it in a bow, create a bond out of it, and sell it on to financial investors who are looking for these kind of stable cash flows. So the answer is yes, we are here. We are open for business whenever you want to talk to us about it. Launch, and NSF Capital is happy to support you.
Thank you, Jabba. Next question, can a municipality set up or take part in a consortium that provides an off-balance sheet solution for that same municipality?
Is that to me again, or is that to John?
Yes, or John. If John wants to jump in, then also possible.
Well, the municipality generally in their procurement process will need to tender, depending on the size and on the country. But the municipality will be able to use the launch contract as applied to national law in their tendering process. And the idea is not that municipalities need to build a new contract, which is counterproductive to what we are trying to achieve, but actually, let's call it a Greek municipality would be using the Greek language and Greek law launch contract, because this will help the commingling of assets. The idea is that what the capital market needs is products above, let's call it 50 million euros worth, but individual municipalities are having contracts of 10, 100, maybe 500,000 capital worth. So it is important that we bring together municipality A, municipality B, municipality C under the same contractual framework with the same payment mechanics and everything, so that when doing due diligence and when securitizing the various cash flows, we've got a homogeneous mass which reduces the credit risk as such due to its granularity.
Great, thanks, Jabba. John, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that Csaba has covered that, but I think ultimately, at the end of the day, that's a question that the municipality has to answer itself. I would really encourage municipalities and different states to participate and use the same contracts, so that we do have a standard contract and delivery vehicle that can be used by everyone.
Okay, thanks, John. Next question. In many cases, in as a service models, a minimum usage or payment per month is expected by solution providers and investors alike. Does this impact the accounting characterization, i.e. would the contract then be considered a lease, especially if this minimum is enough to cover the investment of the equipment? Again, to you, Jabba.
Well, Matt, thank you very much. Well, this is the characteristics of the payments are one of the key, let's call it, deciding points if it's on or off balance sheet. Clearly, bankers like to see something stable. They want to have on the first of the month money flowing in. At the same time, this predictability of cash flows makes it more as a lease. So in what we have done at launch, we've gone away from anything which makes it look like a lease. And there are 5 tests. The more of these 5 tests in the contract are non-lease specific, the easier it is going to be to have the auditor's approval of a treatment off balance sheet. But again, I would caution everybody that one gets the auditor's approval before any contract is concluded, in order not to have unpleasant surprises in the end. Back to you, Matt.
Thank you, Jabba. Yeah, next question. Is there any relation between the life cycle of the asset and the duration of the contract?
Whom would you like to answer this one?
Jabba, I guess, you again.
Okay.
And John, if you've got anything to add as well, please join in.
Sure.
Well, clearly, the asset, the life cycle of the asset, and the contract duration or tenure have got a relevance. But in particular, as one is on an as-a-service basis, it is the promoter's own interest. If he sees something new on the market, and if he's running the numbers, and if he says, well, if I would change that, I would make more money because the client or the subscriber will have bigger savings. So therefore, the life cycle of a certain asset is not the key here. Clearly, it has got a relevance, but as there is a replacement option, you could change 3 times the lighter. You can over in a 20-year contract, and the client would be very, very happy. He would be happy, and you as a promoter would be very happy. Back to you, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Jabba. I think we've got time for one, maybe 2 more questions. So next one is, did launch look at activity risk, meaning a subscriber is closing down a site or changing operation hours, and therefore reducing the scope of savings? Again, over to you, Jabba, and John, if you have anything to add, then please do so.
Yes, clearly we have looked at these things, and as always, it comes down to being practical. When you buy a building and you take a mortgage, just because you're not there doesn't mean that your mortgage banker is now going to let you off the hook. But clearly, we've looked at it. Operating hours will have an effect, but they will mainly have an effect on the client or on the subscriber himself. The contract, and let's not just mix up things here. The promoter is taking on a lot of risk as is. Now, if somebody uses something less, he will still be on the hook for a certain amount of hours of utilization. Over to you, John.
Yeah, thanks, Jabba. I'd like to comment on the last 2 questions, actually. And the previous question was it's really about pricing from a promoter standpoint on whether it's 10 years or 20 years or the technology. And as far as activity levels, I think that in the contract, in the launch contract, we have managed, like obviously a force majeure event, but obviously there are extraordinary circumstances, and I think that we do have mechanisms inside the contract for both the service provider and the customer to be able to work out the situation in that event. Thanks, Matt.
Great, thank you, John. Thanks, Jabba, as well. Unfortunately, we're reaching the end of the webinar, so indeed we didn't get the chance to go through all of the questions, but we'll reach out bilaterally to as many of you as possible with the responses. If anyone has any further questions, please feel free to contact us either via the website or the email addresses that you can find in the slide pack of the webinar. You'll also receive a link to the recording of the webinar, and we'll encourage you to share this with your colleagues and others in your network that might be interested. Finally, once again, please do sign up via the Launch project website to participate in our next event, which is scheduled to take place in June in Brussels. This event will focus on value proposition design and sales process and messaging. More information will be available shortly on the Launch website. Thank you very much once again for attending the webinar, and a big thank you to both Jabba and John for their excellent presentations and answers to the questions. We look forward to being in touch with you all over the course of the project. Thank you.